It's good to see you today. Appreciate you once again joining us for just a brief look into God's Word, a little bit of our daily bread as it is. We're in 1 Corinthians chapter 16. We're going to be looking in verses 5 through 7 today. We're going to be keying in on a certain phrase that Paul uses. Verse 5 says, "Now I will come to you when I pass through Macedonia, for I am passing through Macedonia. And it may be that I will remain or even spend the winter with you, that you may send me on my journey wherever I go. For I do not wish to see you now on the way, but I hope to stay a while with you, if the Lord permits." And it's those last four words, "if the Lord permits," that I would like for us to consider in our brief time together today. If the Lord permits. I wanted you to look at Paul's life and consider a few things that played a part in that idea of if the Lord permits. And you'll understand as I go along. So, one is health. If the Lord permits. We do not know if our health at some point is going to be an impediment to us. Paul, just look at Paul. At some point he developed the thorn in the flesh. We are not for sure what it was, but it was some sort of physical ailment. He talks about in one place, he told the brethren that they would have given their eyes for him if they could have. May pointed to something about that, but he had health issues. In all likelihood, unless disaster strikes, and I tell you what, let's go ahead and put that up there because that's the next point. Disaster sometimes does strike. Paul endured many disasters. The one specifically that comes to mind is the shipwreck. It was a disaster. It was an absolute disaster. He had appealed to Caesar. He's on his way towards Rome, and all of a sudden there's a huge storm. And at the end of the day, the boat's going to be lost. But the people will survive. But it's a huge disaster. So, there are health issues. There is calamity. These things factor into if the Lord permits. They factor into it and they play a real part. Man's laws. He appeals to Caesar. He's on trial. He's arrested. I know I'm kind of working backwards chronologically. But do man's laws sometimes play a part in if the Lord permits? Priscilla and Aquila, who we're going to be talking about later on this week, they actually had to leave their home because of man's laws. Well, sometimes man's laws are an impediment to, frankly, plans that we have made. Here Paul is, and he says, I plan to do this if the Lord permits. Sometimes things happen. Health, disasters, man's laws, stuff happens. Other opportunities. Look back in our passage. He specifically says here, as he's talking about it, and actually we didn't read the verse, but verse 8 he says, I will tarry in Ephesus until Pentecost, for a great and effective door has opened to me. There are many adversaries. We'll talk more about that tomorrow, I believe. But that business, he says, listen, I don't want to come right now because a great opportunity has happened in another place, in Ephesus. Right? A door has been opened, and I want to get through that door. Okay, so that factors into if the Lord permits. And I understand this isn't a bad thing, unless you're the Corinthians and you were looking forward to Paul coming. Not many of them were, but surely some of them were, like Chloe and others perhaps. But these other things, health, disaster, man's laws. Now, let's look at our list, and let's realize that the Lord allows those things to happen, and good things can come from those things. The health, if the Lord permits, but then health gets in the way. But in the thorn in the flesh, what did Paul learn? He prayed 3 times that that thorn be removed, and God's answer was, "My grace is sufficient for you." Paul learned that in weakness, there was strength, because as his physical health declined, he leaned more and more heavily upon the Lord. Is that a bad thing? That's not a bad thing. Now, will that sometimes affect the plans that we have made? James speaks about this very thing. Those who say, "Oh, we'll go tomorrow to such and such city and buy and sell," and he says, no, you ought to say, "If the Lord permits." You don't know what tomorrow holds. Do what's right today. Do what's right today. For those who know to do good and don't do it, to them it is sin. So it's not wrong to make plans, but if you put off doing good while you have the opportunity today, that's not right. Now, Paul's not a procrastinator, though. But sometimes things happened and plans changed. But even as things happened, good things also happened. So, my grace is sufficient. Disaster, that shipwreck. They end up shipwrecked, and it says at a certain island, Malta. Let's just say this. Was there any chance at all for those inhabitants of Malta to hear the gospel? Would they have had any chance of hearing the gospel at all if that shipwreck had not happened? Disaster strikes sometimes. Does that allow you to talk to other people that perhaps you would not have encountered otherwise? We might consider it. Man's laws. Man's laws. Sometimes even in man's laws. I mean, would Priscilla and Aquila ever have met Paul if it would not have been for that edict that came from Rome? So sometimes do even man's laws. Tell you what, just think about the persecution and think about how the church flourished under persecution. So can man's laws that seem and are against God from time to time, can sometimes good and even more good come even at those times, if the Lord permits. Other opportunities as well. So, just wanted you to consider that phrase, if the Lord permits. We do what we can today. And if the Lord permits, we'll see what tomorrow holds. Appreciate you joining us for this brief look into God's Word. A little bit of our daily bread, as it is. Hope you have a good day. Hope to see you tomorrow morning. Thanks for being with us today.